In the Earth's oldest and deepest memories, the existence of some lives is in itself a poem about yielding and reconciliation. He possessed a suit of bony armor that even top predators would find difficult to tear apart, his intricate shield spreading like dense scales from his neck all the way to the thick tip of his tail. Yet, unlike his tempestuous kin who bore massive tail clubs and readily swung those lethal weapons on battlefields to shatter enemies' bones, the end of his tail was completely empty, bearing only a gentle and restrained streamline. Such a heavily armored behemoth, completely devoid of offensive weapons, chose neither to die in the glory of defending territory nor in the desperate wails of starvation during the final moments of his life. Tonight, by the flickering warmth of the hearth, with this story that requires no effort to remember, let us step into his true life. Noah the Nodosaurus. In cold fossil taxonomy, this name represents a solidly built early ankylosaurian that lived along the margins of the western interior seaway of North America. But in that real night 70 million years ago, filled with tearing crusts and changes of supremacy, Noah used a near-eternal, slow rhythm to live as an inward-looking enigma. This is not an encyclopedic chronicle glorifying bloody conquests, but a quiet resonance of how to shed heavy burdens under the pressure of an era and fall asleep peacefully amidst the residual warmth of the rocks. North America during the late Cretaceous was being severed into two entirely different eastern and western worlds by an ocean-like, boundless interior seaway, the air forever permeated with a viscous fragrance blending sea salt and damp soil. The trees in the forest grew extraordinarily lush, towering redwoods rising dozens of meters and bald cypresses bristling with stiff needles blocked the sun completely, leaving only fractured fragments of golden light to sprinkle wearily upon the ground. Noah stood right at the margins of this volatile coastal floodplain. His 5-meter-long, several tons frame appeared exceptionally stable within the shadows of those ancient plants, like a stationary gray boulder. Driving his destiny toward its first major turning point was an unannounced, giant tidal cataclysm. A rare tsunami persisting for weeks ruthlessly submerged the lush shrublands he had originally depended on for survival. The extreme scarcity of food drove the once peaceful herbivorous herds into an intensely brutal state of internal friction overnight, the order completely collapsing in panic. Those nodosaurids and ankylosaurids bearing heavy tail clubs, in order to scramble for the last few fresh leaves untouched by seawater, began to swing their weapons frantically in the center of the territory, the dull thuds of heavy impacts interlaced with the muffled cracks of fracturing bones echoing through the forest daily. Noah watched all of this silently. He saw his once companionable peers getting their flesh torn open in internecine strife, their beautiful back armor shattering into useless fragments under heavy blows, blood staining the muddy tidal flats. As a Nodosaurus without a tail club, he was naturally at a disadvantage in such a violent game, and the aging leaders began to glare at him with vicious, ostracizing eyes, attempting to expel this defenseless misfit from the territory. At that moment, a specific wisdom belonging to an inward nature awakened deep within Noah. It was not an impulse to fight, but a profound weariness of endless plunder and a deep personal choice. He did not meet the leaders' roars, which were filled with jealousy and intimidation, nor did he attempt to use his thick body to smash open a bloody path to hollow power. Instead, on an evening when the heat wave was gradually receding, he turned his massive frame with extreme slowness. Stepping on those reefs rendered exceptionally slick by the washing sea, his movements were as slow as a gray stone statue shifting through time. Without a single look back, he walked step by step away from that land consumed by madness and headed into the desolate, silent unknown coast. Shedding the protection of the herd meant Noah had to face those apex carnivores who roamed the dark nights and adhered to the fast-paced laws of predation entirely on his own, such as the troodontids and large tyrannosaurids prowling the margins of the interior seaway. On this vacant plain devoid of tree canopy, even a single second of negligence could invite a destructive blow, yet Noah stubbornly infused his slow rhythm into his very bones. He walked very slowly. Due to the weight of his back armor and his short limbs, with each step forward, his thick limbs needed to pause in midair for several full seconds, his wide feet landing on the hard sandstone with dull, prolonged rustling sounds that carried a deeply therapeutic rhythm. That posture did not resemble fleeing, rather, it felt as though he was using his body to stroke and perceive every pulse of this earth. Throughout a long day, he not only had to endure the exposure of the blazing sun but also forage along the rugged coastline for those residual, low ferns untouched by salt water. Every time he bent his neck, the heavy back armor would press against his spine, causing a dull ache. The long trek caused a vast amount of soreness and exhaustion to accumulate within his muscle fibers, and his thick abdomen, due to being tightly pressed against the damp ground for a prolonged duration, had begun to absorb a viscous chill, bringing waves of heavy discomfort to his internal organs. Yet he never halted his steps, because he knew that on this ruthless wasteland, the sole way to survive was to find an absolute sanctuary where both his flesh and soul could completely settle down. Ultimately, at sunset, beneath a towering sandstone cliff, he discovered a vast, flat clearing of rocks that had been thoroughly baked by the day's intense sun and emitted a soft, warm brick-red ambient glow. This was a natural haven. The towering rock walls shut out the bitter sea wind blowing from the horizon completely, while the rocks beneath his feet acted like a monumental heat-retaining body, radiating an intoxicating, generous warmth. Noah halted slowly at the edge of the rocks. He closed his eyes slightly, feeling those warm air currents spreading from his lower legs, and the tension within him that had persisted for days finally tore open a line of ease at this very instant. In modern documentaries that thrive on depicting dinosaur battles, Nodosaurus without a tail club are often misunderstood as clumsy casualties of incomplete evolution, as if losing an offensive weapon dooms them to become a predator's meal. But this arrogant perspective entirely fails to comprehend the grand wisdom disguised as clumsiness rooted deep within Noah's absolute defense. His armor was not meant to flaunt power, but to outline a secure boundary for himself in a cruel world. In the second year after he settled in this flat clearing of rocks, late on a night when dark clouds obscured the moon, danger inevitably breached the cliff's defenses and descended upon this silent haven. A massively built Gorgosaurus, driven to madness by a prolonged failure to capture prey, tracked the faint scent of warm life through the air and crept silently to the edge of Noah's campsite with muddy steps. It was a silent gamble of will, life, and death played out in extreme stillness. From the predator's gaping maw bristling with short, thick serrations, viscous saliva bearing a corrosive stench dripped down droplet by droplet, striking the rocks with faint scraping sounds. The ancient cicadas that had been crying in the shadows tucked their wings completely at this instant, the surrounding thickets fell dead silent, and the moisture in the air seemed to freeze into solid ice within the carnivore's heavy breathing. Yet, faced with this terrifying envelopment that could frighten any small to medium species out of its wits, Noah displayed a near-sacred, hair-raising composure and calm. He did not frantically swing his tail attempting to counterattack like his panicked kin, nor did he unleash any pointless roars. He merely lowered his center of gravity with extreme slowness, inch by inch, upon the warm rocks. He tucked his limbs completely beneath his thick back armor, presenting that gray spine, devoid of any weakness and composed of countless bony lateral spikes and shields, directly toward the predator in the dark, turning himself into a literal piece of granite. The ferocious Gorgosaurus ground to a halt just inches away from Noah's spine. It roared frantically, clawing up large patches of mud from the ground with its thick hind limbs, even testing its teeth against the spike-fringed edges, only to leave a few ear-piercing snaps that set teeth on edge and a mouth full of blood. Noah just kept lying there silently, maintaining this near-statuesque absolute stillness, his black eyes hidden within the bony shadows, detached and deep, while the rise and fall of his breathing was so slow it drove one to despair. This siege of will lasted for a full half-hour. Ultimately, faced with Noah's unshakable, mountain-like pressure and restraint, the frenzy in the eyes of that cunning predator was bit by bit replaced by dejection, and it could only retreat step by step back into the deep, dark forest, carrying a body full of exhaustion. Once the danger subsided, the midnight of the coastal plain welcomed the most sacred and gentle moment of the day. The thick dark clouds dispersed completely, revealing the dense ancient sea of stars overhead, the kind that makes one weep, without reservation. The night sky of the late Cretaceous was filled with an unknown vastness, giant emerald-colored nebulae rotating slowly in the deep darkness, casting down a faint, dim celestial light with a healing hue. While the cold air howled past above the cliffs, within the center of this warm clearing of rocks, the temperature maintained a comfort and constancy akin to a mammalian nest. Noah completely relinquished all defenses. He began to conduct an exceptionally comfortable, deeply immersive pre-sleep, heat compress, ritual within this haven that belonged to him alone. He slowly adjusted his posture, pressing his thick abdomen, rendered exceptionally weary and stiff from the long trek and the recent confrontation, flat and tightly against those hot, soft gray sandstones. At that instant, the scorching residual warmth accumulated inside the rocks all day, generously bestowed by the sun, began to seep in slowly, inch by inch, along the relatively soft skin textures of Noah's abdomen like warm spring water. That warmth penetrated his thick subcutaneous fat, wrapped around his tensed muscle fibers, and swiftly diffused into every single internal organ that had grown dulled from the cold, completely dispelling the viscous chill within his body. Noah let out a sigh, the breath escaping his rounded nostrils to form a faint puff of white vapor in the cool air before swiftly vanishing into the depths of the night sky with a long, deep rustling sound. Then, with a near slow-motion elegance, he spread his thick limbs compliantly on either side of his body, allowing every joint to yield to the calling of gravity and settle unreservedly into the embrace of the rocks. This internal warmth possessed an irresistible, powerful hypnotic magic. It was so stable that it made Noah feel he was no longer a fugitive wandering upon the earth, but had become a vital bone of this rock and this coast. The night pressed the mute button on the ancient tides, the sound of waves lapping against the reefs turning into the most soothing white noise in the far distance. Tap, 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 accompanied by this sturdiest secure boundary brought by the earth, Noah's eyelids grew as heavy as lead, and his consciousness began to slowly dissipate within the warm envelopment, dissolving deep into a gentle void. The end of life arrived peacefully and elegantly. For Noah, it was merely the most serene, most enchanting night among countless highly comfortable, deeply immersive dark nights. It was an ordinary conclusion of a dry season transitioning into a rainy season. The air carried the faint caramel fragrance of drying plants, and the night sky lit up with thousands of gentle meteors slicing across the heavens. Noah was already too old, so old that the ancient blood pump inside him could no longer continuously send warm blood to the extremities of his heavily armored frame, and every breath required him to endure the calcified air radiating from deep within his chest cavity. Yet he displayed no deathbed panic. On that night filled with starlight, he merely returned once more to the center of that warm clearing of rocks that had accompanied him for the greater part of his life, lying down slowly in his most accustomed posture. He rested his weary head gently within a smooth rock groove polished by time. The texture of the stone was rough and warm, granting him the ultimate psychological support he had never experienced in his life. Slowly, inch by inch, he began to completely relax his long spine, which had been tensed against the world's prejudices, allowing the residual warmth of the rocks to perform a full-body heat compress for the final time. As those waves of warm gravity completely took over his skeleton, his frame of several tons completed its final settlement within the delicate volcanic ash and rock fissures, his mouth exhaling the last deep, prolonged sigh of his life. That airflow condensed into a colossal puff of white mist in the cool air, before drifting slowly with the breeze toward that open interior seaway, melting into the cosmos without leaving a single shred of regret. The surrounding coast fell into absolute stillness in an instant. The sea wind died down, the tides ceased their clamor, and even the ancient cicadas that favored crying in the night tucked their wings at this moment, as if collectively witnessing an elder of the earth stepping into eternal sleep. Noah closed his eyes completely. The moonlight spilled over his gray back armor that extended like a boulder, transforming him into the most eternal and serene rock statue upon this ancient plain. 70 million years of time passed like an untraceable torrent, ruthlessly washing over every corner of this continent, flattening the former coastal plains and transforming the prosperous interior seaway into the red earth Gobi Desert of today. Noah's mountain-like, heavily armored frame, under the layered envelopment of silt and volcanic ash, underwent dissolution and mineralization, until every single vertebra and every piece of back armor fused perfectly with the cold rock, becoming part of the Earth's own skeleton. Because he died with extreme tranquility back then, and his body suffered no tearing or destruction from any predators, when the joint human archaeological expedition 70 million years later lightly swept away the last trace of red soil from him, all the scholars present were struck entirely speechless by this breathtakingly complete fossil. It was preserved too perfectly, the intricate shield textures were clearly visible, and the body still maintained that healing posture of being relaxed and spread out upon the rocks, enjoying the heat compress, without a single distortion born of fear during a disaster, looking flawlessly like a gray idol that had just fallen asleep at midnight. The world marvels in academic papers at the monumental significance of this fossil in the history of biological evolution, analyzing the arrangement laws of his plates, yet few can pierce through those cold academic terms to see that Cretaceous night filled with the Earth's residual warmth that once warmed Noah's entire life. True strength never requires roars and slaughter to validate itself to the world. it is often contained within the deepest silence and yielding, just like this long lullaby Noah wrote with his entire life. Right now, you might also be lying within your own safe haven, free from the storms of the Cretaceous and those worldly disputes that leave you feeling tensed and anxious. Those tedious trivialities that leave you weary and confused during the day are actually nothing more than a negligible grain of sand upon the coast before the boundless river of time, unworthy of sacrificing your sleep. The earth will quietly cradle your weary frame with the gentlest gravity and the boundless night, just as it accepted Noah millions of years ago, drawing away all your unease and tension. Your bed is radiating an ideal temperature, and the soft bedding possesses the coziest sense of envelopment, just like that dark red rock that tenderly heat-compressed Noah millions of years ago. Drop all defenses within your heart, listen to this story that requires no effort to remember, and let that deliberate, long, and deep breathing guide you to slowly, close your eyes. Good night, Noah the Notosaurus. Good night, to every soul that sheds its heavy armor and returns to a mountain-like calm in the dark.